Salut YouTube! For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rosie. I'm a New Zealander living in France, and I like to make videos about what life in France is really like and trying to navigate the French culture and figure it all out. And today I wanted to do a video on those little things that you notice when you're living in France. Little French culture shocks that make you think, really? It's not that these things are ever good or bad or the right way or the wrong way, but it's just those things that naturally, through living in a foreign country as an outsider looking in, you notice them because they're just so different to what you're used to. So without further ado, let's get into some of the random things that I've noticed since living in France. The first thing I want to talk about is the French and their use of checkbooks. Before I moved to France, the last time I had seen a checkbook used as a form of payment was when my little 87-year-old grandmother would go to the bank and write her check to get out her $20 spending money for the week. It's something that I really associate with the older generation and just being a completely obsolete form of payment. But it's not really the case in France. Like when I moved here, I realized that you need a checkbook. Like as a young person in their 20s, you're gonna need a checkbook to pay for any university fees, to pay for your bond, these kinds of things. I don't know why, but sometimes it's checks only. And I got curious and I looked into it because I was like, is it just me or is this a really normal thing in Europe? And it turns out that France actually has the highest rate of check usage in Europe. I can link the study down below for those of you who are interested. I personally find checks such a hassle to use. I mean, if you receive them, you have to physically go to the bank, fill out a little slip, put it in the envelope, deposit it, and then, you know, several days later it gets processed. So I don't really know what the love affair is with the checkbook. The next culture shock that I want to talk about is that the French like to leave their animals whole. They'll serve the chicken on the table, and the chicken will still have his little neck and his little head attached. Or they'll serve a fish and you've got the fish head there. The whole fish, I mean, it's just there looking at you, you know, with its like its big round eyes. Hello. And even in my canteen at work, so this is a professional environment, you go into the canteen to choose your meal, and we had a pork option, and it was jambon de lait. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's when you take young baby piglets, this is awful, but yeah, and you cook them, and they had the entire, I can't even say it, but they had the whole piglet just there on display actually. And I understand that it's a good way of making you realize that it's actually, you know, real animals that you're eating, etc. And also sort of related to that, I've noticed that they'll eat their meat raw here a lot. So there's obviously the famous steak tartare. And the other day, I mean, because I don't necessarily always understand every single word in French, especially when we're looking at a restaurant menu, I ordered the duck on the menu and I wasn't expecting it, but it came out as a kind of raw patty as well. Chunks of duck, I guess, formed into a patty. The meat was not cooked. And so there's definitely something around appreciating food in its whole form or in its original form. Or something else that you may notice in France, depending on where you're from in the world, is that things often run late here. Especially, you know, when you're meeting up with friends, when you're in a work context and a meeting's meant to be starting. I think that things consistently run a little bit late. Like it's totally okay to meet your friend and show up 5 to 10 minutes late, or to start a meeting 5 to 10 minutes late. And this is something that I didn't have a word for a really long time, but I do now. It's called a time flexible culture. And France is a time flexible culture, and it means they view time more on an order of magnitude, so a general ballpark, rather than a specific and exact quantity. For the French, it's the Italians who are always running late, for example. It's all relative, but that's something that I noticed at first. Speaking of the French versus the Italians, actually, I'm sure if there's any Italians watching this, they're gonna laugh at me. But I find that the French keep in touch with their family a lot. And again, it's all relative because the French people find that Italians keep in touch with their family a lot. I know quite a few Italians that are working here in Paris, and they feel like they need to call their mum, their parents every single day, or, you know, several times a week. That's their normal. And in France, I see a lot of at least weekly catch-ups with families or having Sunday lunches together as a family ritual. And that's very frequent and very normal. And I know now that my boyfriend on his Sunday evenings, he calls his whole family, and that's the bare minimum. And he may also call them on the Wednesday, on the Thursday, that kind of thing. But I remember thinking like, wow, and you know, he just called his dad on Wednesday and he's calling him again on Sunday. Like, what else does he have to tell him? I mean, what is there to talk about? But they just talk about what they did during the week, how work went, and oh, I forgot to tell you on Thursday night, and I went and bought a new book, and just like daily life event stuff, and they chat about that. Something else I've definitely picked up working in France is that there's a lot of things that go unsaid, and so sometimes there's a lot of interpretation and analysis of the communication, because I mean, as a New Zealander, I'm used to things being very straightforward, clear, straight up. What you say is what you mean. In France, especially in the working world, I find, but even in their more subtly in their sense of humor, there are a lot of innuendos, a lot of hints at things, a lot of words chosen, and everyone else kind of just gets it and they read between the lines. I talk a lot in France about the sous-entendu, like what have you heard, you know, underneath what was actually said. We have this a lot as well in sending emails in the workplace, so I feel like there's a lot of reading and rereading and rechecking of emails to make sure that the message is clear, even if you're not saying it explicitly. And also on the receiving end, a lot of interpretation. So colleagues coming together and be like, what do you think she means by la 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 la? Sometimes I'm just like, why do we have to make it so complex? I mean, as a communication style, but that's the way it is. Something else that has kind of shocked me since living in France is that people aren't afraid to kind of tell you off. I've seen families on the train and they have French parents and their little French children, and maybe the children are quite excited, colouring in and making a little bit of noise, and you'll actually have people like turn around and kind of school them, like kind of give them, you know, parenting advice or tell them what to do to keep their kids under control. Or just the other day I saw that, you know, in the reception at work there were obviously some visitors that had come in and they were going the wrong way. So they were walking in the wrong direction to enter the building. So, and the receptionist was like, no, 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 madame, c'est pas par là, no, madame. And honestly, the way she was speaking to them just really reminded me of the way that a parent speaks to a young child. It's hard to explain. You'll have these people that kind of scorn and tell people off as if they're telling a child off. And they're reminding people like, we don't do that, that's not respectful, this kind of thing. And that's really how they can talk to each other when they kind of tell each other off, if that makes sense. And yeah, it's a really funny thing to see actually when two grown adults are kind of speaking to each other like, I'm telling you off, you were very naughty for breaking that rule. Another culture shock, which you're really not going to like if you're a germ freak, which I kind of am a little bit. When you go to the doctors here in Paris at least, you often go to them in apartment buildings. So when you go to see medical professionals, whether that be dentists, doctors, gynecologists, whatever it may be, you often go to their like apartment buildings. So rather than it being a nice sterile clinic with white walls and everything feeling very sterilized and very clean, you're in a lounge basically. I think it's because when you think of these old apartment buildings, you think about how they might get dusty or how, you know, it's a home, it's not a sterile clinic. And that kind of freaked me out at first because I was like, oh, this just feels a little bit different. Like I felt less reassured about how clean everything was, for sure. Another thing that you notice when you live in France is how much food is like the topic that binds any French person together. I think there are a lot of regional and cultural differences even between French people, depending on where you're from in France or what kind of family you grew up in and stuff. But I think that the thing that really binds every French person together is food. I think that the values of France should be liberté, égalité, la bouffe. Food. It's one of their favorite topics. If you want that conversation starter to get talking to someone you don't know, you're like, where are you from in France? What's your regional dish? This is like the magic question. The reason I notice this is because I get asked all the time. Like it's just a standard order of conversation. Like, where are you from? New Zealand, okay. How far away is it? How long does it take you to get home? What's your national dish? This is always in like the top 5 questions that they ask. It's really, really important. Food identity, food history, food rituals. I mean, it's definitely not a cliche. The French are obsessed with food. Another thing that's kind of interesting about coming to France, whether you're visiting or you're living here, is how you approach talking to French people about their accent. I was quite surprised because we all know that the French accent has been rated the #1 world's most sexiest accent. So for me, it's a real compliment to say to someone, wow, I love your accent, or wow, you've got such a strong French accent. If you say that to a French person here, they'll be really offended. So that was quite shocking for me because I've grown up my whole life thinking that it would be such a compliment to have a French accent. Whereas for them, they're very ashamed that they have an accent, like they haven't mastered English, or they feel a bit embarrassed about having their accent when they speak English. So if you're actually saying to someone like, oh my gosh, you've got such a strong French accent, it's lovely, that they may think that you're actually being very mean to them. The last shock that I want to talk about, you'll be able to relate to if you've been an expat working in France, but it's very workplace related, but it's the concept that in France it's very, very difficult to fire people or to lay people off, which is a wonderful thing. But what do you do for those people, because they exist, where they don't actually perform in their job and they're not adding any value to the company, and yet you owe them a job? Like they have their job for life at your company, you cannot get rid of them. So something that really surprised me is that there's actually this thing, it's called putting people in le placard, like putting people in the closet. And it's where you give people like these really random jobs or a really crappy job just to keep them occupied, and you still keep paying them. Of course, I mean, I was a bit shocked and taken aback about that, and I thought it was really unfair. Of course, it's such a minority that it's not that big of a deal, but I found that really unfair. I'm so for the protective nature of the employment law here, but at the same time, I was just like, what a waste of money. Like, because we're paying that person 3 times what a new graduate earns, we have to be very frugal about hiring new graduates because we don't have the budget. I'm just like, something's just not working here. Cool, so I'm gonna wrap it up there for now, guys. I could keep talking about this stuff forever. I've got so many on my list, but I don't want the video to be too long. If you've come all the way to the end of this video and you're not subscribed to my channel, please do consider subscribing so that I know that you're out there and so that you can keep up to date with the videos that I release every single week on expat life, bicultural relationships, working abroad, all that kind of fun stuff. But until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. A bientôt!